All right, so who made Jesse James a stone cold killer? Recently, I got a chance to go to the James Farm, north of Kearney, Missouri, and the director brought out an ambrotype of Jesse James when he was young. And it's really astounding because he looks so innocent. And you realize that something really dramatic had to happen there, not just the Civil War, but he had to have a teacher. He had to have someone to emulate. He had to have some kind of incentive to become brutalized to the way of life that he led for the rest of his life. Or as Alan Pinkerton put it, he's the worst man in America, bar none. For one thing, when the census taker visited the James farm in June of 1860 to take a census of the area, he counted Jesse Woodson James was 12, and his older brother was 16, and he had a sister who was 12. And in the fall, when Jesse turned 13, he was enrolled for another year of school, not realizing at the time that that would be his last. So his education was stopped, and obviously another one began. And who was the cat who was the educator? That's what we want to know. Okay. Well, the teacher was born in Hopkins County, Kentucky, when his family, two brothers and three sisters, moved to Missouri. His father got a chance to be a farmer, and he worked on a farm outside of Huntsville, Missouri. His schoolmates, I love this, his schoolmates remember him as well behaved and a reserved lad. Don't you love that? In 1857, the Anderson family moved to Kansas. They didn't realize it at the time, but they'd moved into the epicenter of the violent storm that was overtaking the country at the time, a flashpoint that would tear the entire country apart. The boy's name was William T. Anderson, and in short order, he would be known as Bloody Bill. Now, fast forward to May 25th, 1863, and Frank James is now 19, and he's riding with a ragtag group of Confederate irregulars who call themselves the Bushwhackers. That's where they made that term popular, and later had a negative connotation. But to them, they were bushwhackers in a good way, and they fought for the Confederacy. The state was really split down the middle with Union farmers next to Confederate. And so Frank James started raiding with these bushwhackers, and they of course would ride up to farms and ask which side they were on, etc. And then they would basically at gunpoint rob people. Well, what's considered the insightful incident that turned Jesse James happened when he was 15. And it turns out he was in a field working with a slave, one of their slaves, on a tobacco field. And a bunch of militiamen snuck up on him and captured him. Now, in many portrayals, they're portrayed as federal troops, Union officers, in Union uniforms, but these were civilian militiamen of the area, their neighbors, and they were tired of being robbed. And so they took Jesse James roughly. Sometimes the story goes that they had a bayonet, they strangled him. There's all sorts of different stories, of course, around the Jesse James story. But they were hell-bent on tracking down Frank James and his men. And so they knew that if they went to the James farm, they would possibly find out where they were. Well, as it turns out, they had just been there at the farm, and they went north to a grove of trees not far from the homestead, and they were gambling. They were playing poker on a blanket to divvy up the goods that they had purloined from their Union neighbors. And so the Union militiamen asked where their son Frank was, and of course Mrs. James and the stepfather Samuel, they said they didn't know, and of course they pushed them hard and they didn't know. And so then one of the soldiers, the militiamen, received a rope, pulled the rope out, and they threw it over a tree, and they put it around Samuel's neck. That's Jesse's stepfather. And they tightened it up, and they said, "Now do you want to talk?" And he didn't. And so they raised him up. They hoisted him right up. And at some point, it depends on who's telling the story. Some say it was just one time. Others say that it took more to break him down, but he broke. and he told where they were. In fact, in one of the versions of the story, Samuels leads them to where the Frank and his cohorts were gambling. Anyway, a gunfight ensued. Two of the bushwhackers were killed in that, in a running fight, and I believe three more were shot dead. And that is always incited as the turning incident that turned Jesse James from that boy in that photo I just showed you into being a bushwhacker himself. He had tried to join earlier, but he was too young considered, and Frank wouldn't let him. And so now he demanded to join them, which he did. And he was soon riding with Bloody Bill Anderson, the guy I told you about from Kansas. Well, under the tutelage of Bloody Bill, the bushwhackers often wore stolen Union uniforms. And so they would ride up to a farm, and they would go up and basically knock on the door, and they'd say, "Where's the man of the house?" And he would come to the door, and they would say, "Are you Union man or Confederate?" And he would look out and see all these guys in Union in Union uniforms. And so he would say, "Well, I'm a Union man," and then they would shoot him down, just kill him in cold blood right there. And then, of course, as they got on horseback to leave, the poor distraught wife was leaning over her husband, weeping. And of course, the bushwhackers would tip their hat to her because, after all, they weren't barbarians. They had manners. Okay. One time they caught two troopers on the road. They cut their throats. It's going to get a little. Let's get a little descriptive here, and hang with me. They cut their throats from ear to ear, and then they scalped them. Yeah, this is true. They scalped them, and then they put these scalps on the bridles of their horse. Bloody Bill was infamous for doing this. And you might say, how did he get so vicious? And the historians believe now that the General Order Number 10, which was created by the Union Army to try to stop this all these terrorists, as they saw him, and these guerrillas in Missouri from stop raiding into Kansas. And of course, there was the famous raid by Quantrill, and Bloody Bill Anderson was with them when they raided Lawrence, Kansas, and killed up 180, 200 men, and left, tipping their hat to the ladies, of course. And so they created this General Order Number 10, which means that they could take the relatives of these known bushwhackers and hold them hostage until they gave up. They thought that would work. Well, they were being kept in a warehouse in Kansas City, and the building collapsed, and two of the women were killed immediately. One died a couple of days later, and I think two were disfigured for life. Well, two of the deceased in that tragedy were William Anderson's sisters. So that's always used as an insight into why he became so, just so vicious in his atrocities. And so now he's carrying scalps, and Jesse James and Frank are learning from him. He is about ready to graduate, and we want to fast forward a little bit here to the Battle of Centralia. And that happened on September 27th, 1864. And Bloody Bill and about 80 men took over the small railroad village of Centralia, and they looted the town, and they found some whiskey in a barrel, and they put it out in the middle of the street, and they started drinking that. So they were wild enough without it, but now they were roaring drunk, and they were in a homicidal mood. And they stopped a stagecoach and robbed all the passengers. And it didn't matter if they were Confederates or not, they robbed them. And then, in one of the biggest tragedies of the entire war, a train came in and had 125 passengers from the North Missouri Railroad. And 25 of them were Union soldiers who were furloughed. They had just come back from Atlanta with Sherman, where they had taken Atlanta. And they were unarmed, and they were going home. And so they were discovered. They were taken off the train by Bloody Bill and his men. They were ordered to strip down because they, of course, wanted their uniforms. And then he furloughed them, as he told Arch Clements, and they were brutally shot down. They took the engine of the train, and they pulled down the whistle and kept it down, and then torched it and sent it down the track. People weren't on it. And then they torched the depot and torched another plane, and then they left. Well, at about 4 p.m., a detachment of about 147 Union troops from the 39th Missouri Infantry, which were led by A.V.E. Johnson, arrived, and they were mounted on horses. They were infantry group, but they were mounted on horses. I love this, that they confiscated from disloyal persons. And I take that to mean that they took them from Confederate people, by force to take, so they're mounted. And then one of the bushwhackers with Anderson knew they were there, and he went in almost to town and then lured them out. It turned and ran, and they went after him. And about 3 miles southeast of Centralia, Missouri, their Bloody Bill was waiting for these troops to come. And it's a famous battle site today. And I went out there recently with Mark Lee Gardner, who showed me where they all were. And it's just breathtaking to see it in the tragedy that was going to unfold. But Jesse James was there, and so was Frank James. And the Union soldiers dismounted, and they just formed a skirmish line. And they had muzzle loaders, and so they had to reload after one shot. And all the bushwhackers are armed with 3 and 4 pistols, Colts, 51 Navies, okay? And they came roaring out of the brush at the bottom of the hill, almost 225 strong, we believe. And Frank James later said that we were laying low on our horses, a trick the Comanche Indians practice, and which saved our lives many a time. And so the first salvo from the Union troops went over the horses' heads because they had all ducked down low, and they ran over the top of these soldiers, and they were annihilated. And Jesse James is usually given the credit for killing the commander, although Jim Cummins, one of the bushwhackers, later said that several of the bushwhackers took that claim. And it's also claimed that Jesse James shot 5 other Union soldiers. So now we've come a long ways from that photo of him on the farm, which is literally several years earlier. And so now he's merely 16, and even in his bushwhacker photo, which I'm going to show you, he still looks like a baby, but there's something in the eyes. He has started to really become hardened. You can see it. And this is the turn. This is the education of Jesse James. So barely a month later, we get the demise of Bloody Bill. The Union Army was tired of his shenanigans and awful guerrilla activities. And a guy named Major Samuel P. Cox, who is a native of Gallatin, Missouri, and now that's a significant location if you know the rest of the Jesse James story. And we won't get to that today. But he got together a group of 300 men. He wasn't even a commissioned officer. He just himself said, I'm going to stop this crazy person, this sociopath. And so he goes in search of Bloody Bill. And about a month after the Centralia fight near Richmond, Missouri, a woman comes in and says, I know where they're camped. And so he set a trap for Bloody Bill. And what he did was he went out to a little crossroads called Albany, Missouri, and he set up a trap there near a bridge. And then he sent, just like Bloody Bill had done at Centralia, Cox sent 30 men out to lure them, and early in the morning. And of course, there's an old vaquero saying that your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. And of course, when the shots were fired into Bill's camp, one of the first men in the saddle was Bloody Bill Anderson. And he and several others went roaring down the road after these guys and rode straight into a trap. A lot of the other Confederates turned to turn back because of the firepower was so strong from the Cox's men. But Bloody Bill was so dominant that he kept going, and he leapt over the lines and turned, him and another person, and he was shot dead right behind the ear and killed. And as the vaqueros are also fond of saying, spit in the sky and it comes back. He was brought into Richmond, where they took several photos of him in his campaign shirt that was sewed by a sister or someone. and they cut off his head just to show that the atrocities weren't only on the Confederate side. They cut off his head, put it on top of a telegraph pole, and then paraded his body around and threw it in a shallow grave. Now, fast forward a little bit. In 1909, Cole Younger came through Richmond with his carnival show on the Old West, and he found out where the grave was, and he went there and had a minister pray over it, and left some flowers for his former leader. So if you're thinking, well, these are really some demonic little kids that must have been an aberration during the war, not true. Were they the exception to the rule? Hardly. Historians now estimate that some 100,000 Union troops were boys under the age of 15 years old, and about 20% of all Civil War soldiers were under 18. And also, one more stat, and by one count, 27,000 people died in these internecine warfare in Missouri, the times when Jesse James was growing up. And now you know how Jesse James was educated to become a stone cold killer.